Never underestimate the power of helping people fix what's broken in their lives or their businesses. Not only is it the right thing to do, it's a heck of a way to grow your podcast. Hello and welcome to another Podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. Look, every podcaster I know, including this guy, wants to grow their show. Doesn't matter if we're a gigantic show that has hundreds of thousands of listeners. They want to grow their show as well. It doesn't matter if they're a teeny tiny show that is hyper-focused on one small corner of the world. There's always people out there that they haven't yet reached, so they too want to grow their show. We all want to grow their show. And we've all heard lots of ways that we can grow our show. Some really smart ideas like build your audience first and then make a podcast that's for them, sure. Some more difficult but artistic and enjoyable efforts such as building the podcast you want to build and then find anybody who might care about that thing. Hey, that's valid. You can do that. Maybe you could build on what other successful podcasts are doing and then try and do it better, try and one-up them, either by the caliber of guest or the equipment or effort you put into the show. Speaking of guests, maybe that's a good idea. In fact, it is a good idea. Get high-profile guests who will share your show with them. Or you go get on a very large show as a guest. Sure, you could do that. Or, and the idea of the topic today, you could solve someone's pain. Now, I got this idea from Podfest because the names are all confusing. Podfest Multimedia Expo 2020 in Orlando, which I just came back from. And I was sitting in a session where niche podcasters who have been successful in building their own niche, all of them business related, so I was keenly interested, were talking about how they've done it, how they've made it, how they've been successful. And they had a lot of really great tips from there. But there was a question from the audience towards the end that I thought really stood out to me. And someone asked this question about how their show could be grown. They were explaining what their show is and what they've done. And one of the panelists, Joe Sanok, he has a hard to describe what Joe does. He has a podcast that is all about growing private practices for counselors. That's what Joe does. Joe asked that person one question, what their question was, I don't really remember because I was too busy trying to get my friend Drew's attention to hand me the microphone, which he never did, so I couldn't ask my question. It's all your fault, Drew. Kidding. The question that was asked, or my interpretation of the question that Joe asked, was this: what pain does your podcast solve? And I think everybody in the room went, ooh. It's one of those clever little things that you weren't expecting to hear. And so you kind of spin your head around and you go, whoa, what was that all about? And the person who asked the question thought, and then gave what I thought was a pretty good answer about what pain their podcast solves. And then Joe's question was, and is that the exact name of your podcast? To which was a little chuckle in the room, and they said, well, maybe it should be. And yeah, maybe it should be. And it kind of got me to thinking, what pain does this podcast solve? What pain does your podcast solve? Hopefully you're thinking about that. Now, not all podcasts are designed to solve pains, although if you unpack that and look a little bit deeper, maybe we're not true. Maybe if you're just there to provide some light levity and entertainment, maybe that's pain enough, just being light and entertaining in a very stressful day. I think it works a lot better the more focused you can get, obviously. I mean, here's a guy who's got a podcast and a podcast network that is designed to solve the problems of clinicians in private practice. This gets pretty specific. I'll bet many of you don't even know what that means. I might be one of those that didn't know what that meant. So yeah, what pain does your podcast solve? Now here's the challenge with that. Let's say that you are one of my listeners who's got a very successful show. Things are going well. And you ask yourself that question and you say, my podcast doesn't really solve pain. None of my shows really solve pain, but they're all really successful, so I'm not going to change. Totally get it. I totally don't think you should change if you're really, really successful. Maybe, however, it does spark the idea that you could grow bigger because of that. But also keep in mind that the podcast you're doing today likely isn't the podcast you're always going to be doing. And maybe, if that one is successful, the one you're doing right now, maybe you could start another one that does start to solve pain. And maybe you can grow that podcast even faster because A, you already have a platform, and B, if it is tangentially related to the show that you have right now with a big platform, letting those people know that if they would like very specific answers to questions and problems that they might have solutions to them, you've got them over here, could be a way to grow. How does your podcast solve pain? What pains do you solve with your podcast? It's an interesting question, and it's caused me to have a bit of a think, have a bit of a look at the things that I am doing in the episodes that I'm putting forth here. And I think I do solve some pains, but I think I could be better at solving pains. I think I could be more focused on solving pains. So I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to try to be more focused on solving the pains of podcasters, specifically working podcasters. And that's going to have some impact on this show and a bunch of other shows as well. Well, and by a bunch of other shows, I mean there might be more shows coming. There might be more podcasts coming, more actual programming. Maybe. We'll see where that goes. Have you asked around to your peer group, the people that you podcast with? Because we've all got podcasting buddies and friends that we run ideas off of, typically in the same circles. I know that I have a close relationship with 2 or 3 of the other people out there whose podcasts are for podcasters, and we talk on a regular basis. I don't think we talk about this question of what pains do we solve enough. So I'm going to bring that up. I suggest that the next time you're talking to your podcasting circle of friends, you bring up that you heard this episode of Podcast Pontifications talking about pain and solution and see what they say. Every time you mention my show to another working podcaster, it helps me grow, and which is a good thing. More ideas get spread around the world. Tell me also what you think about solving pain. If you think that's a great idea, leave me a comment. Or just send me an email. evo@podcastlaunch.pro always reaches me, as well So that's it. I shall be back tomorrow with yet another Podcast Pontifications. Cheers!